Celebrated atheist, author, and neuroscientist Sam Harris appeared on Real Time, Bill Maher's HBO show. The conversation about Islam that ensued created quite a bit of controversy. Harris said, among other things, that, quote, Islam at this moment is the motherlode of bad ideas, unquote. He went on to say that more than 20% of Muslims are either jihadists or Islamists who want to foist their religion on the rest of humanity. That comes out to about 300 million people. I beg to differ and said as much when I responded with my own thoughts on the show. But I wanted to talk to Mr. Harris in person, so here he is. He's the author of a new book, Waking Up, and we might get to it.
Yes.
But first I want to ask you about that number, which
Sure.
it struck me you sort of pulled out of a hat. If you do have, something in the range of 20% of all Muslims who are either jihadists or Islamists, and which implies condoning violence and such. I'm just doing the math. That comes to about 300 million.
Right.
So there were 10,000 terrorist events last year. Let's assume that 100 people. Let's assume all of those were Muslim. Let's assume each event was planned by 100 people. Neither of those assumptions is right, but I'm being generous.
Right.
That comes to about 1 million people who are jihadists. So that still leaves us with 299 million missing Muslim terrorists.
Right. Well, there are a few distinctions I think we have to make here. One is there's a difference between a jihadist and an Islamist. And there I was talking about Islamists and jihadists together. And so Islamists are people who want to foist their interpretation of Islam on the rest of society. And sometimes they have a revolutionary bent, sometimes they have a more of a normal political bent. But they do want to...
The fact that somebody may believe that, for example, Sharia should obtain and women's testimony should be worth half a man's in court, doesn't mean that they want to kill people. Right?
Well, no,
those are two. Being conservative and religious, which, by the way, is not my orientation at all, but it's different from wanting to kill people.
Yes, yeah. Well, we should, again, you have to parse this on specific points, like do you favor killing apostates? Do you think adulterers should be killed? And even among Islamists, you'd find more subscribing to one versus the other, depending on the poll you trust. But I didn't just pull the number out of a hat. I mean, there's a group at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, that looked at 40 years of parliamentary elections in the Muslim world, literally every election that has occurred, and found that Islamists got 15% of the votes. So I would say that when if you take this number 15% who vote for Islamist parties, and then you look at the poll results on specific implementation of Sharia law. So do you want adulterers and thieves given the traditional punishments, or should apostates be killed? You never find the number, with very few exceptions, you never find the number as low as 15% voting in favor of those punishments. It's often 60%, depending on the society. So I believe nudging that up to something around 20% is still a conservative estimate of the percentage of Muslims worldwide who have values relating to human rights and free speech that are really in zero-sum contest with our own. And I just think we have to speak honestly about that.
Clearly, Islam has a problem today, but there have been periods when Islam was at the vanguard of modernity. It was the place that preserved Aristotle and preserved science. So if it was Islam that was the problem, how come it was okay then? In other words, that would suggest that it is the social and political conditions within Muslim societies, or the people now. In other words, clearly Islam has been compatible with peace and progress, and it is compatible with violence, I would argue, just like all religions.
Yeah, well, up to a point. I would say that specific ideas have specific consequences. And the idea of jihad is not a new one. It's not an invention of the 20th century. And many people are now spreading a very PC and sanitized history of religious conflict. Islam has been spread by the sword for over 1,000 years. And yes, there's been an intensification, and for obvious political reasons, of intolerance in the 20th century. But the idea that life for Christians and Jews as dhimmi under Muslim rulers for 1,000 years was good doesn't make any sense. And certainly life for Jews, when you compare it to medieval Christendom, then, okay, it might.
But that was the main alternative. I mean, that's why when the Jews left Spain and were expelled, they went to the place that they thought was most hospitable to them, which was the
Yes.
Ottoman Empire,
Okay,
which
but
was
so-
the caliphate, right?
I criticize Christianity as much as anyone. I wrote a book, Letter to a Christian Nation,
Right.
which is just a vilification of the history of Christianity, the influence of the beliefs in the
And
modern
I would have
world.
thought, having written that book, you would recognize that there are elements of Christianity that, as you point out in that book, are compatible with and celebrate slavery and
Yeah,
violence
absolutely.
and all these very, very backward attitudes. And yet there are times when Christianity represented that, and at times when it has represented peace and modernity.
Okay,
right?
but there's a few things we have to distinguish here. One is specific ideas have specific consequences. So when you ask why Jews aren't living out of Leviticus and Deuteronomy anymore, and they're not sanctioning genocide, they're not sanctioning killing people for working on the Sabbath, there are several answers to that question. One is that there's no Sanhedrin, but the fact that they don't have a Sanhedrin
Explain what a Sanhedrin is.
It's a consecrated body of elders in the community that can judge whether or not somebody should be killed for working on the Sabbath. So the details matter, and one of the details here is that a belief that in Islam that the one true faith has to conquer the world through jihad, essentially, and that free speech.
But jihad means different things in different
again,
people.
It doesn't. I agree with you that we have to convince the Muslim world, or get the Muslim world to convince itself, that jihad really just means an inner spiritual struggle. That is the end game for civilization.
Right.
But the reality is, an honest reading of the text and an honest reading of Muslim history makes jihad look very much like holy war.
So in that sense, the problem is you and Osama bin Laden agree. Because
Well,
after all, you're saying his interpretation of Islam is correct.
Well, this is the problem. His interpretation of Islam is very straightforward and honest, and you really have to split hairs and do some interpretive acrobatics in order to get it to look non-canonical.
But do you really think that the path to reforming Islam is to tell Muslims that their religion is the motherlode of bad ideas, that they should become atheists or symbolic followers, or nominal, I think was the word you used,
Right.
nominal followers? I mean, do you really think that 1.6 billion devout Muslims are going to go, oh, damn, of course, Sam Harris is right, my religion is crap, and I should just abandon it?
No. Well, I slightly misspoke there. I didn't mean nominal followers in the sense that only Muslim atheists could reform the faith. What I meant is followers who don't take these specific dangerous beliefs very seriously and want to interpret jihad as an inner spiritual struggle as opposed to holy war.
But do you think you're helping them, or you're making it harder for them by as I said, adopting the Osama bin Laden interpretation?
I'll tell you who's making it harder for them: liberals who deny the problem. I get emails every day from atheists and secularists living in the Muslim world who say, I can't
forget about others.
Well, I'm telling you,
helping?
I'm telling you, the only metric I have for that is I hear from people living in Pakistan, for instance, who say, if a liberal like you can't even speak honestly about the link between ideology and violence, what hope is there for me? I can't even tell my mother what I believe about God because I would be afraid of my own family or village killing me.
Sam Harris, thank you very much.
But back to you in terms of how have you evolved? What's been the evolution in your own politics? I mean, for example, you were very strong in terms of the threat of radical fundamentalist jihadism.
Still am.
I know.
Yes, I think liberals should stop booing me for pointing out that Islam is not like other religions, that is a unique threat, and that
but it's not Islam you're against. It's
all religions are stupid. They are. Yeah. I mean, I doubt if you're really religious. It'd be very hard for me to believe that you actually believe in these intellectually embarrassing anachronisms from the Bronze Age. Do you really believe in the Bible, which
all my bets.
The Bible, which supports slavery, which is pro-polygamy, which believes a guy lived inside of a whale?
As you know from this program, I'm a devotee of science too.
Right. Okay. So I heard.
I want covering all bets.
I saw Howard Dean on TV the other day, and he said something along the order of, he said, the people in ISIS are, I said, I'm about as Islamic as they are, you know, distancing the vast numbers of Islamic people around the world from it. That's just not true.
It is true.
It is not true, Charlie. There is a connecting tissue between...
you mean, you know, behind every Muslim is a future member of some radical...
Let me finish.
I thought I was doing that.
There are illiberal beliefs that are held by vast numbers of Muslim people that I don't think
vast number of Christians too.
No, that's not true. Not true. Vast numbers of Christians do not believe that if you leave the Christian religion, you should be killed for it. Vast numbers of Christians do not treat women as second-class citizens. Vast numbers of Christians
I agree with that.
do not believe that if you draw a picture of Jesus Christ, you should get killed for it. So yes, does ISIS do Khmer Rouge-like activities where they just kill people indiscriminately who aren't just like them? Yes. And would most Muslim people in the world do that or condone that? No. But most Muslim people in the world do condone violence just for what you think.
That?
They do. First of all, they say it. They shout it from the...
Vast majorities of Muslims
Absolutely.
say that?
There's a Pew poll of Egypt done a few years ago. 82%, I think it was, said stoning is the appropriate punishment for adultery. Over 80% thought death was the appropriate punishment for leaving the Muslim religion. I'm sure you know these things.
I know. Well, I do.
So to claim that this religion is like other religions is just naive and plain wrong. It is not like other religions. The New York Times pointed out in an op-ed a couple of weeks ago that in Saudi Arabia, just since August 4th, I think it was, they have beheaded 19 people. Most for non-violent crimes, including homosexuality.
Those didn't got the hands off the thief.
Right. Okay. So we're upset that ISIS is beheading people, which we should be upset about. But Saudi Arabia does it, and they're our good friends because they have oil.
Right.
Okay? But they do it, too. This is the center of the religion. I'm not saying...
They're now fighting against ISIS, too. They're joining us in the fight, as is the Emirates.
Well, they are both fighting ISIS, and they are for ISIS.
Well, not the government. I mean, some of the private...
Certainly the government.
It's a bit like today about Qatar. It's a big story in the New York Times, which you may have seen today, about Qatar.
Yeah, but...
and there's some guy there is supporting who's a Muslim in...
But, I mean, in Mecca, where infidels, non-Muslims, are not even allowed in the holy parts of the city. I mean, right there, we don't have that example in other religions. Okay, they do behead people. Now, if they were beheading people in Vatican City, which is the equivalent of Mecca in... Don't you think there'd be a bigger outcry about it? So this is the soft bigotry of low expectations that we have with Muslim people. Yeah. When they do crazy things and believe crazy things, somehow it's just not talked about nearly as much.
Would you come to this table and have a debate about this with a moderate Muslim?
Find one, yes. Find one.
I promise you I'll find one.
Find a Muslim.
I do believe that what we see with ISIS is not representative of...
As I said, connecting tissue.
It's not representative of the Islamic religion.
Again,
I don't think the Quran teaches them to do this kind of thing.
Well, you're wrong about that. The Quran absolutely has on every page stuff that's horrible about how the infidel should be treated. But, for example, again, ISIS says that they should perform genital mutilation on all women 11 to 46. Right. Would most Muslims agree with that? No. Or carry it out? No. But as Ayaan Hirsi Ali points out, she says, can we really say... Well, and she would know better than either one of us. She said, can we really say that women are treated equally in the Muslim world? I mean, their testimony in court is very often counted as half. They need permission to leave the house in some places.
But a lot of moderate Muslims would say, in fact, one of the things that we need to modernize is the idea of the way we treat women. Lots of them.
But in this country, if you just use the wrong word about women, they go nuts. And in all these other countries, they're doing things like making them wear burqas, and I hear liberals say things like, well, they want to. They want to. They've been brainwashed. You know, they don't want... It's like saying a streetwalker wants to do that.
So let me just talk about this.